In her bosom, I had hoped to find realer, more original souls than I had generally found outside of her margins, in the insensitive wilderness of bland civility. I am talking about the art scene here. The opposite proved to be true. I had woefully underestimated her. If she was anything, it would be vain and cunning, demarcated and mean, incestuous and utterly Machiavellian. Schoolyard conformism once again, and something I can no better describe than a stock exchange in status capital. There is only one valid currency here, and that is name association. That is your name, and which names, which dots, you are able to connect to yours. At face value, this should not shock anyone. As subjective a field as the arts could be expected to be stratified subjectively. The fault, however, is that within this sociotope, there seems to exist nothing but such a childish value metric. There seem no longer to be in place reliable self-correcting mechanisms to safeguard true meritocracy. No timeless principles that guide the evolution of its discourse. No free marketplace where artists and public meet without hinder or guidance. Where artists and public find or reject one another freely. That interaction is completely regulated, domesticated, casted, and castrated by the guardian hamsters of the subsidy apparatus. In the overpopulated strait that remains, which by the way is peppered beyond repair by metastazations of postmodern malignancies, name association comes first. Quality, competence, artisanship, discipline, talent, erudition, intelligence, integrity, authenticity, originality, merit, vision, all lag behind as scornfully neglected seconds and thirds. This clique-like community creates the ugliest people I know. People who enter this assembly line called art school with much of their innocence intact, and exit it maimed and contorted, Botoxed, cat-eyed, duck-faced, Michael Jacksoned. Before a decade has passed, you will find them working tricks among the higher party apparatchiks in the grand party foyer, pouting, posing, preening, ready to do anything, to wear anything, to say anything, to believe anything, to propagate anything, for their handful of subsidy pocket change and that pat on the back, for that fix. People who gave in to dishonesty consuming them long ago, who integrated it as a proactive social weapon, who have forgotten themselves, for whom this all has become baseline, forever merged with the game. Any differential that may have once existed between friendship and status whoring has been silently annulled here. Friendship and opportunism are one. Do not take it personal. The result is a game of musical chairs, a hysterical game of musical chairs with only one single objective: access to that desired in-crowd status of bourgeois, postmodern, upper-middle-class neo-nobility, to dressing up those elbows in that smooth Canal District patrician silk, to savvily surf those waves of fashionable ideologies, to a pamphletist produce, an expected demanded uniform form. The Volkskrant Jugend. Those eccentrically named poster kids from inner-city Amsterdam, Haarlem, Het Hoy, East Side Utrecht, and the Arnhem-Nijmegen Fortress. Children of the Waldorf, Montessori, and Jenaplan school experiments. Spokespersons for the left progressive upper middle class. Guardians of the cargo bike bourgeoisie. Two-faced. As that Labour Party champagne socialism they so vigorously try to revive. New! From the makers of champagne socialism, higher ground progressivism and selective liberalism, widely available in an inner city near you. The emptiness of their idealism speaks from the fact that they jockey with it, that gallivant match in progressiveness. I am so progressive, not as progressive as me. Look how progressive I am. No, but I am the most progressive. The quacking continues in the digital pond. Proactively, overtly signaled, aggressively submissive, ideological conformity, is the membership card of this clique community. It is the slossmote encircling it, or rather it is the flowers and bees and rainbow-decorated folding screen that keeps its rotten inner workings out of sight. Egotopia, hypocrisy of the lovable left, pushing and shaking human tower, elbowing skein, socialite civil war, made up of as much narcissistic atoms as there are players in the game. One-man armies, impatient, to bypass those so-called friends and transcend them. What are they but temporal alliances, dreaming, reaching, for crowns and triumph arcs, for that finish line, the notch of the cultured caste, with all her advantages and public broadcasting tenure opportunities, how they enjoy their vibrant gentrification hotspots, that romantic porch stoop wear and tear of Northside Amsterdam, Katendrecht and Lombok, as they regard themselves cycling over the Haarlemmer Dike, rambling on those cobblestones on a bicycle wreck bought off some crackhead. These progressive magicians mind-correct the world, confuse what is ought to be, glitter, with what is. They, gut Kinder dem Sozialdemokratie, will set out to cure the world definitively from that post-biological sin that is man and woman, from meanness, us and them, selfishness, hierarchy, war, poverty, stupidity, of each inequity imaginable, that they themselves are such formidable examples of the brutal truth that the naked ape does not want to be equal to his peers, with their schemy elbowing, sheepish exclusion of others, and that schoolyard-like competitive double-crossing. Let's just put that aside for a second. The snobby moralism with which these upward, recently urbanized provincials try to differentiate themselves from those ignorant, dumb, evil, right-wing proles. That of all generations, it is this generation, the only generation in the entire history of mankind, that did not endure oppression, scarcity, war, and rebuilding, fate and disaster, or the impossibility of social mobility. In a world that is still teeming with these brutalities and injustices, almost in any corner of the world but ours, that of all generations it is the least uncomfortable generation in 400,000 years of humanity and 9 million years of proto-humanity. Millennials who order sushi on their smartphones from their student allowances while taking a shit. That of all generations, it is this generation that is so obsessed with victimhood, may at the very least be deemed remarkable. Telling, we want what we cannot have, even if that what is adversity. Because what in this overcrowded narcissistic world could be worse than an ungrandiose identity, a generic middle-class story? The victimology pyramid is this generation's shameful response to this problem. That recently invented privilege to victimhood index, with which you can easily calculate your victimhood metric, and with it your affirmative preferential rights over the higher privileged. Besides simplistic and infantile, and a direct continuation of exactly the kind of categorical thinking which it claims to want to end, it is strongly counterproductive. It has chased away a large fraction of its own constituency, along with it many center-left and center-right and sane left-wing thinkers, onto the right half of the spectrum, so to speak, and they even applaud this development with some sort of Stalinist glee or blind, self-indulgent pride. This internal cleansing. We are the light, they are the darkness. Holy missions justify unholy means. Punch a Nazi. The great culprit here is unmistakably the postmodernist cancer. It retarded and subverted in just a few generations art. From beauty to the elimination of competence as a requirement to artistry. Feminism, from a struggle for equal rights to gender theory, aggressive subjectivism and biology denialism, and socialism, from class struggle and capitalist critique to radical identitary group power relations. It troubled the practice of science and academic pursuit, and thereby destabilized our most precious asset and most vital of preconditions, the fruits of Enlightenment thinking. The wholesome immersion of the monstrously cowardly art world in this imbecilic rich kid baby think is a fundamental capitulation, the severity of which is insufficiently acknowledged. Art should be a buffer to totalitarianism, not a collaborative scheme to enable it, or a mouthpiece of its doctrines. These thought-policing, virtue-signaling, selective history reading, and evolutionary biological fact memory holding, Victorian Stalinistic ad hominem lynch mobbing, church father finger wagging, echo chamber scum. Of all people, they hold sway over those la grande bellezza dorkies to our proverbial Rome. They, who have been channeling the entire potential of thematic bandwidth available to the arts, through the arts, for some 12 years now into the monotonous narrow of identity politics prostitution, who see no objection to the censoring of art, literature, lecture, satire, journalism, science, internet, language, social interactions, and self-censorship, simply because some opinions just aren't goody-good McLovell goods. Nietzsche's lambs have managed to get those eagles chained to the surface by their claws with their herd terror, and my gosh are they empowered. Together, we have allowed provincial moralism to enter the arts, and with it, her antithesis. We have allowed postmodernism to enter the arts, and with it, her undoing. Ugliness, vagueness, randomness, gleeful irony have been elevated as new virtues, and no one has the spine to say the emperor's naked. That contemporary art is in fact inferior to its own preceding tradition, to its original syntax. That slow evolution of form follows function, that culminated and flowered in the beautiful stretch of Impressionist, Modernist, and Surrealist genius in the late 19th to mid-20th century, only to completely go off the deep end in the 70s, when this noble 12,000-year-old tradition was violently and abruptly decapitated by the rusty Franco-Berlinic blade of postmodern, subversive intellectual terrorism, which, for half a century now, has been rebelling and experimenting and deconstructing as repetitively and gratuitously as ever, unchallenged, state-sponsored, and only rarely opposed. Duct-taped female breasts, pointless battles of exhaustion on stage, papier-mâché stroboscope shit in our musea. That crap, on which practically everyone agrees it's annoying, nearly everyone, except that tiny group of installation druids nodding in earnest agreement. People who have a clear interest in lauding the equally hideous talentlessness of their peers, and thus, in a mutual mirroring of relevance reaffirmed, legitimizing one another's work, declaring their nothing the pinnacle of art and societal critique, the practice to this postmodern theory. This congregation of naked emperors. The main collaborators here are the very art schools themselves and their directories. To educate postmodernism in an art school is like schooling students of an engineering faculty in the usual disciplines of engineering one half of the time, while at the same time teaching them centimeters are but subjective, that in fact buildings do not exist, that concrete is malleable, etc. It is a rowboat, with two rowers, Aristotle and Foucault, sitting across from each other facing one another, each holding an oar on their right side. The result, the rowboat circles around its own axis. Those insecure clay lumps, students, on these art and theater academies do not realize, or realize perfectly, that they have been given a miracle excuse on a silver platter. You don't have to really be gifted or skilled, no matter how mediocre, lazy, or afraid you may be, you can always call it performance. Installation, work in progress, conceptual, ready-made, dada, goo-goo, gaga, faux inclusivité. The academies falled their hands on the institutionalization of the problematic term performer. The maker, apparently the multidisciplinary meat grinder, that discipline diffusing everything is nothing and nothing is everything propaganda beast, had come in full motion and was beginning to work insofar as that so many vague, undefinable, apologetic fuck-arounds were graduating from art schools, that an inclusive, all-encompassing categorical term had to be installed to ensure validity. It is this term that signified the kiss on the forehead of discipline. Exactly here it was that the historical breach point lies with the discipline, both as an artisan practice as well as an institute and foundational principle, namely that of skill. With the use of this seemingly innocent jargon term. Before this breach point, you were a visual artist, painter, sculpturer, musician, singer, actor, stage director, film director, cinematographer, novelist, playwright, screenwriter, poet, dancer, architect. After, a performer, a maker. Maker. Ma-ker. M-F. Noun. An actor or actress who, instead of sharpening themselves on the harsh schools of classical acting instead, invests in a kind of auto-directorship in which they are at the same time actor, performer, director as writer of their own solo performance. Performance again, concoctions, without having to be experienced of either of these disciplines and without being held to the actual ruling quality standards that apply to each of these disciplinary fields. Oh, and by the way, they therefore are cheap and therefore readily programmable by these austerity-impoverished shitty theater festivals. A graduate art school student whose discipline and right to exist are so confusing that the generalization euphemism performance or maker needs to be applied in order to hide the lack of substance or validity and keep the hollow card house that is this subsidy industry from imploding. A drama teacher who painfully attempts a so-called stage production and who is appropriately reluctant to entitle him or herself director. Someone who embraces the apologetic culture of drama teacherdom, confusing acting ridiculously in a linoleum acting classroom or on some sad and dusty community stage with art, doing artish. In fact, everyone, every player in this art field game, whether formally recognized or not, everyone who does anything at all in post-art school subsidized art fuck-about life, or her enabling drama teacherist art groupie margins, no matter if what they are doing has any sensible merit or not. Tomity churchardomification of the art field, as well as the problem of a persistent lack of funds, could both be easily solved by making art education exclusively university stuff, and to stop funding drama teacher courses altogether. Graduated actors and directors make for better drama teachers anyway than these talentless goofs. And in turn, these jobs should be made available to actors and directors as a consistent source of income. Less plus better plus higher average IQ artists equals more than enough state dough for their fewer numbers, and existentially, exponentially superior art. Not that artists should be funded by the state in the first place, fucking domesticated lap tackles. This anti-disciplinary swindle has amputated one dimension from art: artisanship. In other words, skill, competence, and grit, and therefore the conditional necessity of the pre-existence of talent, and thereby has subsequently democratized the arts absolutely. The arts as a public Duchamplu. The concept has defeated texture. The witty idea almost suffices as the artwork itself now, and the focus still lies, as it has for over half a century, with the ever-expanding stretch of the abstract and nihilist voids. A crusade that does not care for beauty, solely for the deconstruction of all cadres. The art schools, dubious entities as they are forced by financial incentive, getting paid in full for graduated students only, to enroll more students than they qualitatively ought to, are integrated more and more into disgusting corporation-like conglomerations, HKU, ACA, Artes, Fontes, etc., while it is common sense that they can only function integrally and gracefully as small autonomous units. In order to justify this budgetary top-down necessity for an overly inclusive student population, they integrated this postmodern horseshit. To account for this harmfully extended inclusivity, protecting subpar students from pre-graduation removal. To justify this towards the more talented students by creating a whole alternate, diametrically subversive way of doing things, parallel to the existing route, and to dilute curricula with postmodern courses and blend the more costly, solistic disciplines with horseshite postmodern courses to lower the overall expenditure of these faculties. In this way, these art school factories became the executors of their own dilution and domestication. Standards had to go, because standards one can fall short of. The consequence of this corrosive cycle is an entire art school generation that has been raised on a foursome of erroneous notions. Error 1. Innovation is an artist's obligation. Whoever pressures another to innovate forces that other into a hyper-rational, labored kind of self-conscious reactivity towards the existing discourse. Innovation thus becomes an overly self-conscious positioning within discourse, almost always of a subversive or deconstructive or revolutionary nature, rather than an organic progression stemming from one's own authenticity. In the episode of 24 Hours With, in which René Good was the star guest, formerly our national philosopher at that time, host Theo Maassen asked him the question whether he had created some self-styled brand of philosophy, whether he, so to speak, had his own philosophy. This was not the case. A conscious choice, that was. A thought through abstinence. According to Gude, in our malleability-crazed societies, innovation is blindly equated with progress, with improvement. It is blindly assumed that innovation is, in and of itself, a positive, while when one regards, for example, our Western post-war architectural trends, l'innovation pour l'innovation, when left unchecked, visibly leads to a kind of failed playfulness, a novelty that is more often than not unappealing and purposeless. What he believed to observe, he could best describe along the lines of a one-liner by the American novelist Kurt Vonnegut. Everybody wants to build, no one wants to do maintenance. Maintenance. Awe. Respect. Service. That was what is lacking nowadays. Not in the least to fight the phenomenon described by the German phrase die ständigen Rückfall durch Vergessen, the continuous relapse due to forgetfulness. That pattern of progress and loss of progress and revival that you see repeated throughout human history. Think Bronze Age collapse, Greco-Roman Golden Ages, Medieval Dark Ages, Renaissance, Inquisition, Enlightenment, 20th century totalitarianism and Soviet collapse, 90s boom, current era, and on and on and on. That ongoing process of a stapling of knowledge and prosperity, and then a loss of both through forgetfulness, negligence and complacency. Static periods that separate dynamic peaks with centuries, sometimes millennia. According to Gude, underneath all this urge to innovate, lies a restlessness that causes a lack of attention for what has already been created, achieved, done, established, which in turn, according to Gude, inevitably leads to a weakening of awareness and innovation inflation. Does what Gude highlights not also apply to the arts? To what extent are we even allowed to question this premise? The premise that every innovation in the arts is good, that innovation always has a constructive effect on the artistic consciousness of artists and the general public? That innovation is a goal in and of itself? Even more so, that this is her God-given duty? Could there be something going on in the nature of everybody wants to deconstruct, wants to eliminate the need for architecture, thus maintenance, or everybody wants to build without using construction? Erroneous assumption 2. Skip to abstraction. Artists like Basquiat and Karel Appel painted in what could be described as an infantile fashion. Picasso and Mondrian, in the end, only painted cubices and patchworks and forms. A tradition of abstraction that leads back to the 19th century. What seems to be forgotten is the fact that all these revolutionary abstract masters of old all started as apprentices in the classical schools, as precision drawers. How they, through a long road of fine arts, charcoal sketches, etudes and etches and decades of refining, arrived at their own signatures and definitive forms. Take Picasso's bulls. Read the image from left to right and behold an abstraction progress in action. Is directly skipping to the abstraction itself not a rookie mistake? What is abstraction? The verb to abstract comes from the Latin abstrahere, which means to omit. Logically, there first needs to be a something, a structure, a texture, a construct, a form, before anything can be omitted. To be able to minimalize, conceptualize, or bend. In plainer terms, to be able to fill the canvas with meaning through just a handful of lines, one must first know how to convey meaning at all. If Picasso couldn't do it, arrive at his peak of brilliance and abstraction mastery at the very start at age 12, in all probability, so couldn't you. Is searching for meaning from abstraction itself not a mistaken approach? Not as a tool of omission, but as a dogma of inscrutability. Doesn't it work precisely the other way around for those that still have to obtain this mastery, namely to first surrender to the painful task of learning how to convey meaning, the figurative Hermetic way? Erroneous assumption number 3. The director as the creator or artistic starting point. The director is a conductor who mistakenly believes he is a composer. Erroneous assumption number 4. Universal truth and beauty do not exist, because they do exist, and they know it and fear it. Like the have-nots envy the haves, and like the unfuckables secretly despise the fuckables, the talentless hate the realities of talent and discipline and competence and authenticity, the immutable truths that underlie quality and beauty. True quality is felt democratically, like a beautifully struck musical note or a chord in an impressionist French piano masterpiece, or delightful late May weather. And it is time that we stood up for these universals, that we restored them, their sovereignty over the arts, their superiority over the postmodern fuckery. Stop that faux inclusivité. The emperor is naked. Postmodernism is more hostile to art, more hostile to truth and to beauty and to meaning than any government austerity program could ever be. Think about it. Just unleash a Zizekian key bono on this strange situation. What would suit the globo-capitalist conspiracy? In reality, that hard-on for efficiency, art-unfriendly, penny-minded Germanic cotter's state of ours, better than an art scene that metastasizes malevolently from the inside out, that submits itself to its domesticators voluntarily, and that renders itself low-cost through ditching its most expensive and intensive disciplinary discourses. There is only one way back to integrity, and that is a full-on declaration of war on postmodernism. Next, a radical disentanglement from that school-marmish puppet mistress state, Mommy Gov, and that subsidy dependency through which she subjugates the tweaking and fiending arts within the confines of her own socio-cultural little Marie Antoinette playground. Who gives us a conditional right to exist, so long as we agree to function as cheap social workers and never thread outside of her control and her expenditure book? Who has us orchestrate neighborhood safaris, wherein art's name is your honor, you dumb goddamn dejected breed of castrated domesticates? To make mistakes is to be human, and in thousands of years of art tradition it was inevitable that we would fuck up majorly at one point or another. Behold, that treadmilling bullshit on stage, and those untidied beds with titles and word salad explanations on title plate standards beside them, and Berlin, 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 and blah blah blah, and you have been teenaging deliciously, like the mad, puberty-driven revolutionary rascals we've all been at some point, burning down the world for fun. You have had a great time kicking, smearing, daubing, dismantling, smoking pot in the depressing borough shopping mall, and blowing bubblegum pops. But the healthy thing about puberty is that it stops. It is a necessary prelude to adulthood. As you turn around in adolescence, grow the fuck up, and retrospectively realize with self-gentle shame how futile and hubristic your antagonisms were. We have given you more than enough space to be children, but now it's time to quit your fucking around. We want the public back. We want beauty back. The sublime, the art, yes, the competence. Vraie exclusivité. To make mistakes is to be human. But at least have the bloody character to admit you've made a mess of it. That your little anarchist experiment has led to nothing but subversive and provisory, meaningless ugliness, nothing but apologetic fuckery. Then again, maturity is what is lacking. Allow me to suggest that we, in our turn, as a small but revolutionary contribution to discourse restored, let's call it a principled return to old speak. That we from here on out refuse to ever again mouth the word maker when applied to the practice of artistry, makership, and with it any such terms in the performance, conceptual, post-disciplinary realms, as they are nothing but a nothingness, veiling terms designed to include the unworthy, those who simply aren't good enough or courageous and disciplined enough to learn to master a true discipline. Since it was this term, the maker, makership, that marked the betrayal of discipline with a kiss on the forehead.